Shalom, Kindred family. I am Alex Cui, the Mandarin pastor of Evangelical Chinese Church of Seattle. In this year, our Kindred series, I will teach the first message from 1 Peter chapter 1, the first 12 verses. The sermon title is The Benefits of Living Hope.
My name is Reverend Mary Bogan, one of the associate pastors at Damascus International Fellowship. I will be preaching from the title, Tough-Minded Holiness. The passages are 1 Peter, 1st chapter, 13 through the 21st verse. Yes, I absolutely love how you captured the theme of these people, kind of what they were experiencing, what they were looking at, because it reminded me so much of what it was like for my family, my mom, my time to grow up. It talked about a time when these were a people that looked like everybody else, but they were living in exile in a world that did not embrace them. They lived in a world that what kept them so motivated was this inheritance, this thing that they could not see, but they were looking forward to it. Because of who they were and who they identified with, they experienced institutionalized humiliation, rejection, and in a sense, a betrayal from humanity. And that was the culture of these people during the time of the Roman Empire, just this intense culture of suffering. I was so captured and also just had to just take a deep breath as we talked about the cruelty. They could be hung, they could be crucified. And I just had to take a deep breath because I am so familiar with all of that. All of that. My mom is 95 years old, and she is now just beginning to talk about her world. And as a child who lived in that vulnerable space, I just so resonated with the culture of that time, and also knowing that as a child, that's what we lived with, and that's what my mom lived with, is that we never expected to have any rest down here on earth. And so identify with that culture of just believing that our joy would come in the morning, but that morning would never happen here. Every day you were vulnerable, but you lived in this belief that you were so significant to God, that this relationship with God was so deep that it was just, that he loved you. And therefore, you lived in the hope of that. And that's how I identify with this culture and what these people were going through, because it's not so far removed from my own history.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your family story. I have the same feeling. The people living in this world, even though we have a different background, we have a different culture, but the feeling somehow we can relate. I appreciate the passage we chose for this year, Kindred series. Peter addressed to a large Christian community, a large group of people. They live in the ancient time, the Roman Empire in the Asia Minor area. So the people there, they are not local people. They are exiles and sojourners. They live in a very side life, just like you share. I was lucky when I moved to the U.S. The people the life are very different than 100 years ago. But I read the history when the early Chinese immigration moved to the U.S. The situation is very similar to the people Peter addressed. I feel like this is God's wisdom. When the Christianity growing in the early time, he chose in an area people will have a common feeling, challenge, difficulties to fight with, so that we can learn the truth from the hardship of the life. Reverend Bogan, I have a feeling when I read the letter Apostle Peter addressed to the Christian community in Asia Minor, I feel like because the Chinese Christians always ask the question, why didn't God choose the Chinese people in the first time? Because God chose Jewish people, Israel didn't choose Chinese. When I read First Peter, I realized I found the secret for the answer, because Chinese people by that time mostly never moved to another area. They live in their hometown. Like Peter addressed to the Christian community in Asia Minor, they experienced the life of exile, the sojourners' life scattered in a different place. So this is a common human life, the hardship, the challenges, difficulties, the hostile environment, all those things, if you never leave your hometown, it's hard to experience. So God chose this area at this time to reveal the truth, the eternal truth, which is the people live in this world with a living hope in heaven. So regardless what race you are, what location you live in, but this is not your home, eternal home. We have a home in heaven. So this is how God delivers us from the human hardship and all the difficulties.
Yeah, I totally connect with that. I think one of the things that, as I think about the First Peter passages, they were scattered. Mm-hmm. They were there because of earlier kinds of persecution. Mm-hmm. And, this whole theme about what it means to be peculiar. Mm-hmm. The peculiarity of an individual is to live your life that you look very weird. It's like, why would you want to be there? Why would you want to be a part of something? And these Jewish Christians and some Gentile Christians, there's always this conversation about who we're talking about. But the idea here is that here are people. They are already coming to a place. They are scattered. And it reminds me of when we think about Wilkinson's work in Warmth of the Suns, where people within the United States in the South migrated to the North and other areas with the hope and the expectation that things would be better, that things would be different there. And yet sometimes the whole framework that is still there. And the framework is really three things. It is this institutionalization where there's humiliation, supported by something so powerful and so strong, the rejection because you're different, because you're weird, to them you are, or have no value. And then the other thing is this whole sense of betrayal. It's like, sometimes people think that, we're talking about our own passage here in America. We're citizens. We're told that we're citizens, and yet in some way we're exiled. In some way we're betrayed because we don't have that kind of protection. And yet Peter is writing to these people who are identifying with Christ and that they're vulnerable. And, part of this whole story was that, Nero was protecting his ego and all of that, and he was beginning to use the most vulnerable people as a way to show his power. And I think about that whole history here in America and what it means to identify with this whole sense of what does it mean? Because Peter is saying, because you are identified with Christ, you will identify with his suffering. I used to think, when I would read these passages like from Paul, so he thanked God for the privilege of suffering, I used to call Paul an idiot because who says something like that? And I think to even say something like that, Pastor Alex, makes you a peculiar person.
Mm-hmm. That's
it
right.
makes you a peculiar person because, there's a song that said, well, ain't that peculiar? That you would be in the midst of this world and singing the same songs that your oppressors are singing. Peter is saying to them, when I think about my own passage, what does it mean to have a tough mind holiness? Holiness is not a moral code. It means, what does it mean to have your whole being set apart? To be able to see something that is not so apparent. And he's saying the grace is, and this is where it gets so deep for me, that I had to understand this so much longer. There's something that our ancestors used to tell us as children. They said, keep on living.
Keep on living.
Keep on living. And you will understand it better by and by. And I think that's what Peter was saying.